my treasures, the Showdown in Badlands mini set has been revealed. Delve into Deepholm is the name of the mini set centered around Therazane, the final original elemental lord that has not been in the game a single time in the past 10 years. So let's begin looking over these cards that have been revealed so far, including some dual class cards and some highlander support to a class that was already going towards the highlander route, even though it didn't have a big payoff, but now it definitely does, and it's going to be a nightmare. So let's begin with Therazane herself. She is going to be a 7-cost minion with 7 attack, 5 HP, elemental, taunt, death rattle, double the stats of all elementals in your hand, and deck. So there are actually some classes that could easily abuse this because it is a death rattle. In theory, if you find a good enough elemental in something like Druid in particular, where you can easily trigger this death rattle multiple times, at least until Castle Nathria rotates out, then this card will be pretty powerful in that class in particular. However, Elemental isn't really the tribe within Hearthstone that has a lot of charged minions. However, Alkair does exist, so you could in theory use her in combination with him, though you'd have to find other ways to duplicate both her or Alkair. Either way, there is a little bit of a possibility of different decks that we could see form around Therazane, and I can't wait to play around with her. Alright, now for the remaining neutral cards. The first one is going to be Maruut, Stonebinder, a 7-cost, 5 attack, 6 HP minion. Battle Cry, if your deck has no duplicates, discover an elemental to summon. Add the others to your hand. We will be seeing one of the excavating packages cards that is going to be added in this mini set that does a very similar effect. However, this is a neutral payoff for any Highlander deck that does exist currently in Standard. It is pretty decent. I could see it seeing some type of play in a new variant of like Elemental Shaman because there is enough elemental support. However, it doesn't have an elemental tag itself, which makes some of the elemental synergy that does currently exist in Standard a little bit weaker. It does allow you to also, in theory, run Reno Lone Ranger in a elemental aggro deck. That could make it actually pretty decent. Overall, it might see some play, but I think it's probably one of the weaker legendaries in this mini set. The first neutral non-legendary minion is going to be a 6-cost, 2 attack, 8 HP elemental dragon, stone drake, divine shield, taunt, lifesteal, cannot be targeted by spells or hero powers. I don't really think this one is going to see too much play. It isn't really what either a elemental deck needed or a dragon deck really needed. It does dilute the pool for some of the dragon synergies that we did see in the main set, making dragon Druid a little bit worse using Ray Estraza, which is actually probably healthier for the game, and that is probably why it's being printed here. It isn't a bad minion if you can somehow get it buffed up multiple times. It has some synergy with Therazane, but who knows? I could be completely wrong, and this card could be utterly busted. I just don't see where it sees too much play. Now for the next card, which is going to be Shell Spider, a 2-cost, 3 attack, 2 HP elemental. Battle Cry, if you played an elemental last turn, draw a card. Great for elemental aggro decks. This card will probably see a lot of play. It's additional draw power to refill your hand, which aggro decks historically have been missing. And finally, we have Iridescent Gyro Worm, a 3-cost, 4 attack, 3 HP elemental. Death Rattle, give each of your minions a random bonus effect. So we've seen this type of card printed before with the bonus effect. This is very similar to one Amalgam Ban. Either way, this death rattle isn't the easiest to trigger because it is a death rattle and not a battle cry, which might make it a little less playable. However, I could maybe see this play in a death rattle aggro druid deck if that comes into fruition. There are quite a few really good death rattles that you can easily abuse in druid, and this just adds another one to the mix. But before we move on to the non-neutral cards, we might as well go over the excavating rewards that are going to be added within each individual pool. We have 3 of them. One for the common rarity, which is going to be Heart Bloom, a 1-cost spell that gives a friendly minion +2/+2, deals 2 damage to a random enemy minion, which increases the odds of having removal from your excavating rewards at least early on, which makes it incredibly strong. The next card is going to be Deepholm Geode, a 2-cost, 1 attack, 2 HP elemental. At the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to all enemies. I am really curious if some people will try to use the excavating package now in classes that don't have a legendary reward to try to maximize getting additional copies of this and be able to maybe like OTK their opponent or do at least 14 damage in a single turn with a board full of these cards. However, honestly, I don't think a deck can form around a card that you have a 1 in 5 chance of randomly generating, but it does look like a pretty interesting card, and it will probably see a lot of play and increase the playability of the excavating package. Now, the final card that has been revealed for the excavating package is World Pillar Fragment, a 3-cost spell that discovers an elemental to summon, add the others to your hand. Great for the elemental synergy decks. However, it will require you to play some non-elemental synergy cards, which may make it not usable there, probably making it one of the worst excavating rewards. Let's get into the familiar face that has also been revealed. Deepminer Brann, a 6-cost to attack 4 HP minion. Battlecry: if your deck has no duplicates, your battlecries trigger twice for the rest of the game. Oh, why did they print this card? Even at 6 costs, I can honestly say this card will probably see a lot of play. There is just a lot of ways to abuse a card that allows you to duplicate your battle cries twice. This card can easily be abused with Black Rock and Roll, where you're trying to buff up things like Trench Stalker, which will allow you to hit your opponent's face twice with a pseudo charged minion. There's other cards that you can easily abuse with this. If they hadn't quote-unquote fixed Odin, and this is probably the reason why they did fix Odin, then you could have easily abused Odin multiple times, which would have got out of control really quickly. But because they did nerf that, then that synergy doesn't really exist. But there still are ways to easily abuse this. This is a even cost card, so in theory you could try to make a Thaddeus combo deck where you're slamming this down on the same turn using something like Cover Artist to copy the Thaddeus, and then you're going to slam down the elemental that does 5 damage to your opponent's face, but then it'll be 10. Then finding ways to duplicate that card, or even just bounce it back to your hand to do another 20 damage to finish off any opponent. Until this card rotates out, this is going to be an incredibly strong combo enabler to watch out for, and I can't wait to play around with it, even though it's going to be a lot of people's worst nightmares. Dual class cards are going to be returning. The first ones that we're going to be seeing are for both Demon Hunter and Warrior. The first one is going to be Crimson Expanse, a location that costs 4 with 2 durability. Choose a damaged minion, summon a copy of it, goes dormant for 1 turn. This makes it a little bit harder to easily abuse in weird wacky combo decks. Both of these classes do have access to ways to damage their minions actually quite easily through things like Immolation Aura for a Demon Hunter, or any of the Enraged Warrior support that does exist currently, though that is mostly rotating out. It's also worth mentioning, because this is a 4-cost card, it might be a little bit harder and not see too much play, but you could use it with any of the charged minions in either of these classes, which could easily abuse this card. Now, the next card is going to be Burning Heart, a 1-cost fire spell that deals 2 damage to a minion. If it survives, give your hero +3 attack this turn. This is probably going to be used in Demon Hunter more than Warrior, just because Warrior does already have Odin to increase your attack by quite a bit. However, this is a pretty good card either way, and I could easily see it seen play in Enraged Warrior as a very good enrage enabling tool. Alright, now for the remaining Demon Hunter and the Demon Hunter Rogue cards. The first one is going to be Fell Fisher, a 4-cost Fell spell for Demon Hunter. Deal 2 damage to all minions. At the start of your next turn, deal 2 more damage to all minions. Now, with the Fell tag, that actually does increase the playability by a little bit, but there isn't too much Fell synergy currently in standard rotation. It also is worth mentioning, this card is a little bit of a delayed AoE effect, and I think Chaos Nova is currently in standard, and that doesn't see much play, and if it doesn't, then this card probably won't either, because that card is just a much better version of this. It is kind of interesting that we are exploring this avenue of Demon Hunter cards, or at least synergies once again, but again, I don't think this card is that strong. The next one is going to be Quick Pick, a 2-cost 1 attack 2 durability weapon that after your hero attacks, draw a card. Great for any aggro-based deck that might want to run this card. Demon Hunter has a lot of ways to buff up their hero, so does Rogue, at least their weapon, making this card probably one of the more playable cards within both of the classes that is actually meant for, which is kind of a shock. A lot of these dual class cards only really end up being playable in one class, but I think this one will be playable in both. And then for the final card, it is going to be Shadestone Stalker, a 1 cost, 1 attack, 1 HP elemental. Rush Battlecry, take your weapon and gain its stats. Now, this is a card that I'm very interested of how it actually works, because it is kind of vague on how it should work. In theory, it could just give your weapon +1 attack whenever you do slam this down, and basically allow you to use your weapon to remove a minion on board and then hit your opponent's face with that big weapon that you had. But then again, I'm curious if it loses the durability on the weapon once it does attack and it does die. Overall, this is one of those cards that I don't think we'll probably see too much play. All right, now for the remaining cards for the day. First one is going to be Fool's Gold, a 1 cost spell for Rogue that gets a random golden pirate and elemental from other classes. For Rogue, at least Pirate Rogue, that's actually quite interesting. It's a deck that I've been wanting to revisit because Hook Tusk is going to be rotating out soon. It also is worth mentioning this is kind of a decent support for Thief Rogue, which isn't actually that bad either, though it is a little bit harder to easily abuse. The one plus side about this card in particular is the fact it is a 1 cost card, so you can use it on turn 1, and then hopefully you'll get some low cost minions since pirates tend to be lower, and there aren't that many in other classes for you to randomly get, outside of ones that are weirdly in Priest. So let's get onto the Priest Rogue cards. Hidden Gem is a hidden gem for Overheal Priest, a 2 cost, 2 attack, 2 HP elemental, stealth at the end of your turn, restore 2 health to all friendly characters. Great for Overheal Priest, as mentioned before. Really not that useful for Rogue. Does increase your survivability a little bit in Rogue, but there are better ways to just use some early game removal tools instead of a card like this in Rogue in particular. Stealth support in some falling up sets, maybe that we'll see some play there, but honestly right now this is really just a Priest card. And now for the last Priest and Rogue card, Shadow Word Steal, a 5 cost shadow spell that returns an enemy minion to your hand. Oh, power creep on Drowned. Even though this does cost 1 more, this is a card that could easily be abusable in Priest. It could also technically be abused in Rogue to steal like a key minion from your opponent, or at least a minion that has taunt, so you can just welt on your opponent's face with a bunch of minions that you might have on a wide board. Overall, I do think this card is kind of playable, but it might cost 1 too much to be incredibly playable. Now, so those were all the cards revealed today. Let me know down below which ones you're most looking forward to using and which ones you're most frightened for. And honestly speaking, I think Brann, I'm most frightened and excited to play. Brann is absolutely insane, and I can't wait to see what wacky combos I can come up with him. Now, like always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.